And so it came to pass that we were live. It was Friday, not Good Friday, kind of mediocre Friday, the April the 11th, which is to say 9 days before the birthday of Adolf Hitler. It was 8 o'clock a.m. The sun was behind clouds. The birds were chirping, and there was doubt, honestly, as to whether it was going to be a great fucking day. Um, but we all faced a choice. We could crawl back under the covers, or we could pour ourselves a cup of coffee in our new mugs. Yeah, you got to hold, you got to hold your hand behind it so the camera. That's right. And we could make it a great freaking day. And so we assembled in this weird virtual space where a super creepy guy in a dog shirt and a very eccentric woman with a cactus and a snowman um, assemble us. And we greeted guests who will show up whenever they do from Finland and Sweden, respectively, and from Ukraine, but temporarily sojourning. And notice that I used the word sojourning there because it has more biblical kind of connotations, right? Particularly around Passover, where the Haggadah reminds us that we sojourned in Egypt, which means we didn't reside there. She is sojourning in Gdansk. Um, and we asked the cactus to introduce us as he always does. And he did so.
You're watching Dog Shirt TV, the marketing revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, and there are many, is that, sometimes I do the monologue in this sort of affected quasi-biblical tone. And another one of the revolutionary features is that we do it every day, even if the day sucks, even if we can't decide whether the tariffs are on or whether they're off. And still, a third revolutionary feature is that we have a CIA snowman to entertain the baby so that our guest can maximally participate with the baby amused by the snowman. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, people, but we are allowed. Hello, Ava. Привет.
I would say hi.
Hi.
She
Hi.
likes the snowman better than you.
Yeah, well, the snowman is objectively more interesting
And
than
the
I am.
cactus. I think she liked the cactus. Yeah.
Should we make the cactus talk again so
Oh,
that
yeah,
you
let's make
amuse Ava?
Hi, Ava. How are you, Ava?
She's so confused.
She's
Honestly, me too, though. This is the first time I'm hearing this cactus talk, so I'm.
Well, the cactus. You like that, Ava?
It's so bizarre.
guys. I turned the cactus off. The cactus does get annoying, much like myself. Like at some point, you got to turn it off. So, yeah, you like
Yeah,
okay.
we like the cactus.
Hi, Ava.
Are you gonna do your signature hi wave?
Ben is a weird man.
Hey, dude, I'm not the one with the talking cactus on the show.
Holly is amazing.
All right. Ava, do you have deep thoughts for the beginning of the show today? Do you?
Yeah. A little bit deeper than that, Ava.
Okay. I just want to say, Ava, that it is great to see you this morning. And I know that this is confusing for you, but you are a star and you are being watched now by uh, 21 people
Oh,
who are glad to see you. Folks, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have a show hosted by a very peculiar guy with a dog shirt, an eccentric woman with a cactus and a snowman, and a confused woman in Gdansk with a baby.
that's
And eventually
such a great
Minna's
description of me, Ben.
and eventually Minna's going to show up and be very straight-laced about the whole thing.
Yes.
So Holly, Nastya, Ava, what's on your minds today?
She's always 5 minutes late with her highs. Um,
Yeah.
I was just reading this book about NATO and the Arctic, this thing, which is apparently like one of the best books written on the subject.
Well, and it involves Northern Flank, and Minna's Substack is called Northern Flank Notes.
Yes, and it's a very good Substack. Everyone should subscribe to it. It's very good. So I was reading about the history of the relationship between Norway and the Soviet Union and the US and how it was all very confusing for Norway because Norway
Hi.
was kind of trying to defend itself, but not too much, so to not escalate with Russia. Very interesting stuff.
How about you, Holly? What are you thinking about this morning?
Well, I am reading Navalny's memoir, which is very good. And I'm reminded again how much humor and personality he had. He was
Yeah, he was a funny guy.
he was a happy warrior, wasn't he? He was
But
just
praising him in the presence of Ukrainians is going to get you in trouble.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they don't
like
like him.
Navalny. Okay,
No.
sorry.
No.
Sorry.
There
Well,
was
okay,
was
right.
him
Wasn't
and
he?
his wife.
He had Ukrainian lineage. He had family in Ukraine, he said.
Sure. Doesn't help.
Anyway, if you're not Ukrainian, it's a good book.
Here's the other thing about, you see, if you're going to praise a Russian to Ukrainians, you have to know how to do it. There's a few tricks to
I
it.
don't know how to do it.
See, all right, you can't use Navalny as an example
But
because
definitely not.
hating Navalny is part of
The national
it's
pride
part
and
of the
idea.
creed.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
it's a way of saying there are no good Russians. Even the good Russians aren't good Russians. But if you have a Russian who you want to tell Ukrainians is okay,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways to do that, but you have to know the code. So
Yep.
the code is he's Russian, but, and then there has to be something after the but that you actually lead with he's Russian, but then, like he's Russian, but he rides around the city with a big Ukrainian flag on his bike and he comes to all the protests. Or he's Russian, but he's broken with his family and all of his social media is pro-Ukraine. Like you have to acknowledge that he's Russian, and then in the second part of the sentence, establish that he's okay, and or he's Russian, but all the Ukrainians in D.C. Treat him as one of the group. He hosts Ukrainian defenders, that sort of thing. All these are real examples, by the way.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to offend Ava. She's very offended. She's obviously very offended. But if you're not Ukrainian and you're more objective, I suppose.
Or maybe less objective.
Grossing book.
Actually, less objective, I'd say, because, it's not like Navalny's memoir is really a true reflection of his life and who he is.
Well, it's a good read. It's engrossing.
I'm sure it's a good read.
I want to say that at the risk of pissing off Nastia, there are reasons for Americans to react differently to Navalny than Ukrainians. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. I know. I see
By
it.
the way, I've seen Navalny posters down by the sunflower garden. I assume Ukrainians did not post those.
No, so that location is used by different groups, and the Ukrainians grow the sunflowers, but there's a group of Russians who, again, are accepted by the Ukraine. They come to all the Ukrainian protests. They're very much accepted, but they are also pro-Navalny. They're part of that Russian dissident movement. And when Navalny was killed, they used that tree as a little bit of a shrine. And the same people who destroyed the sunflower garden also destroyed all the pictures of Navalny. So that's kind of a shared space, and the Ukrainians and the Russians don't disturb each other's stuff.
That's nice. Speaking of the sunflowers, when are the sunflowers being planted?
Probably May 11th, assuming I am not in Norway with Nastia.
I will not be here May 11th.
Where will you be?
My nephew is graduating from Rice in Houston.
Well then, and Nastia, when are we supposed to be in the Arctic in Norway?
So the conference is May 20th to 21st.
Oh, so I won't be there yet.
And so somewhere around that, well, a week around that, we'll be there.
I want to go to the Arctic in Norway.
You should come.
I should just come.
We should just do a trip.
My husband will probably have things to say about that, though. So anyway, because it costs money, like money. What is money?
But the conference is in a town that's described usually in the media as a spy town, where every second person is a spy or whatnot. So
wow.
I think we need some, knowledge of how to navigate that environment, Holly. So you're very welcome.
Well, analysts are not known for their street smarts, and in fact,
Holly is not really like tradecraft girl.
Although I have to say, I am so warm and friendly that in some ways I would have made a really good case officer.
It's true, although the whole former CIA analyst, Chiron for you,
I've done that before, Ben.
Active duty CIA recruitment officer, The
other thing is about being covert is it's actually more, I think I've explained this to you before, it's actually way more awkward and difficult to be overt because they tell you, they still don't want you to say where you work, but they don't give you a story. And so you have to, they just tell you to well, just figure something out. Don't lie per se, but don't tell the truth. And just be a really weird, awkward person.
Right.
Which you are anyway, because you're a nerd analyst, and just be really weird about it.
And this gives rise to lots of conversations like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a research analyst on what's Central Asian affairs. Really? Where do you work? I work for the government.
So here's how it goes in Ukraine. There is a bunch of random Americans who walk a very particular way and just dress a very particular way. And when you ask them what they do, they say that they're here to help the civil society. And then for 5 hours, they proceed to tell you stories about Afghanistan and Iraq. And you're like, civil society, my ass. It's like a running joke that half of the CIA.
Again, in the field, they're probably not actually CIA because in the field, again, if you go overseas, you're given a cover story and it's all
right, I know.
it's here in the US where things get really weird and awkward, you know?
So
But the
who
covert
are
ones
those
have
people?
stories, and so
The
I
people.
would be able to maintain.
So wait, the people who walk a certain way and are there for to build civil society and are tell you
Ex-military.
stories, are they are they military contractors who are like advising? What should we assume about them, Holly?
Oh, you're asking me? I don't know who
Well,
these people
I
are.
mean,
they can be like,
They're
you know,
probably ex people that are doing like consulting, I'm guessing. I mean, there's a whole industry.
PMC things.
Yeah,
CIA people
you don't
don't
really see
walk
it
a
in
certain way.
Africa.
That's
You don't really see it in Africa, but I've heard like certainly in the Middle East, there's all kinds of like ex military intelligence people running around doing like consulting for various people.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in Africa, you don't really, nobody in Africa has money to hire such people. So,
they all work for like Blackwater or Z
yeah,
or. All right, so Nasia,
real concerns about
I
it.
have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the press today is full of stories about how Witkoff is going to meet with Putin's people, and the administration is really impatient now because there's been a month since the Ukrainians accepted the ceasefire, and the Russians still aren't doing it, and you
Mm-hmm.
know it's almost like the Russians don't want peace.
Wow,
And
who would have
who
guessed?
could have
Excuse me.
guessed? Um, and my question is, are the Russians fixing U.S.-Ukrainian relations here? That we had this dramatic rupture a month and a half ago, and it was all predicated on this idea that the Ukrainians were being, um, the bad guys. They were sucking at the U.S. teat and not, taking a ceasefire when all they had to do was give up all their rare earth minerals and agree to lose their land. And now you go a few months in, and of course, there's still the minerals deal problem, but basically, U.S. where the weapons are flowing again, the intelligence is flowing again, and the Ukrainian and the Russian, clearly in the U.S. view again, the Russians are the problem. And so my question is, um, are things actually slowly repairing by virtue of circumstance?
I don't see it that way. I see your point. I see that like certainly it's nice that we aren't the ones under fire right now. It's so interesting giving this like very important speech
Yeah,
when there are all these things
we're gonna
happening.
do we're gonna entertain Ava, and you're gonna
Well,
try to
I
answer the
analyze foreign
question without getting
politics. Okay.
distracted. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, like, it's surely nice that Ukraine isn't under fire from the US like a month ago, but I don't think that that means that there is some sort of, repairing of the relationship. I think Trump is annoyed not because, now he likes Russia less and then likes Ukraine more. I think that inherently for him, Ukraine is a very small, the Russia's war in Ukraine for Trump is a very small piece of like a much larger game and a much larger long-term relationship between the US and Russia. And so for him, the war is just like sort of annoying. Like he just wants to wrap it up. And, he gave this deadline, April 20th, that there has to be a ceasefire. And all of this is just optics for him. He just wants to claim that he stopped the killing and move on. And move on to like working with Russia, trading with Russia, including in the Arctic and doing all sorts of resource stuff. So, I don't think, I mean, it's certainly nice that we aren't the ones being bashed in the Oval Office for once, but I don't think it's a good sign of anything long term. Because I
But
think
I'm
ultimately,
but
long term, Trump is interested in working with Russia one way or the other.
right, but if you can't work with Russia,
But I think you can, though.
can you? I mean, they
On,
actually
mm-hmm.
the State Department actually said either today or yesterday there is nothing we can talk to Russia about until there's a ceasefire. Um, and so Russia says, yes, we accept the ceasefire, but there are these 70 problems that we have to resolve first. And
And then they go
it,
and kill 9 children.
Hi.
right, and then they go
And
kill
that's just
kids.
one day, yeah.
And you know, I I have no doubt that Trump wants to stab you guys in the back, but he can't do it without looking like a total cuck. And
Okay, but he already looks like that every single time.
yeah, but not to himself. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm just beginning to think he's actually being backed back into a place of um, it'll never be warm vocal support. It'll never be, not that you guys like this. We're with you as long as it takes. Um, um, but I wonder if he's back, if he's getting backed into a corner. Hello, um, you're very distracting. Um, and
People who are just listening to the audio of this are going to be super confused.
yeah, so for those who are listening to the audio,
Ben is
uh,
insane.
Ava, who is sitting on Nastia's lap, is being super cute, and Holly and I are trying to entertain her. Hi, even while we ask Nastia serious questions, and appear to be being stood up by Minna Olander, which
Oh yeah, by the way.
hello. I'm not sure what to make of. Um, so, all right.
So
Here's
what
my
do you
question.
think that's gonna mean? Like, do you think the
Well,
US is gonna have to
let me
Okay.
sketch out a super optimistic scenario.
We love
This is
those.
my version of Trump optimism. All
Silver
right.
linings, let's go.
So here's my thought. Um, it turns out the Russians are not amenable to a ceasefire under any conditions, not just that Ukraine could accept, but that the United States could accept. That they really do want, a different Ukrainian government as a precondition. They
Which
really,
is just Jesus Christ.
right. They really do want, what are some of the other more outrageous things they've demanded? Uh, a promise that the Europeans and the Americans will not try to rearm Ukraine, right? These are Russian preconditions for a ceasefire. I'm going to mute you
Sorry, I'll
while you're not talking. Um, and so let's say that they don't relent on those things. So you're basically not talking about a ceasefire without preconditions, which is what the Ukrainians have already accepted. Then it seems to me there comes a date where Trump has to say what he teased in that interview with NBC with was it Kristen Welker or the other day, which is, if I determine that it's Putin's fault, I'm going to do things, right? And he was talking about secondary sanctions on oil. Now, Trump doesn't, he says things and then does other things all the time. But the day he says this is Putin's fault, which is something that it's very emotionally hard for him to say for whatever reason. Since 2015, he's never been able to say, I can't work with Putin. He's unreasonable, right? These very basic things that the rest of us, find obvious, but for him are real Rubicons, and they're really tough to do. It seems to me when he does that, there are things that follow from it, both for him and for Republicans who are uncomfortable with the current situation because they're basically pro-Ukraine, but they, um, don't want to cross Trump. And I think that moment puts us in a very interesting position where you could have an American policy that's basically cold, quiet support for Ukraine. It's not loud, it's not, you know, self-congratulatory the way the Biden administration was, but it's just basically keeping, you know, uh, working with Europeans to keep Ukraine armed, keep Ukraine fighting, and not not necessarily even changing rhetoric very much. We want to work with Russia. We blah blah blah, but and so I'm not sure what would prevent that except that it's too good an idea for Trump to do. So let me float that. How would, and this is actually the policy that Zelensky's government has been pursuing, which is just ever since that White House meeting, just quietly do what you have to do to make clear that it's the Russians that are the impediment, agree to everything except the most exploitative version of the mineral deal, and eventually they'll realize that we're not the obstacle. And so my question, Nastia, is why does it not work?
Can you hear me? But I can't hear you now. What happened? Oh, because you're muted. Right. This is so confusing.
I
Ben.
am I don't know why I got muted. I
Okay.
was trying to unmute you, but you were trying to unmute yourself. So I was unmuting you and then you were remuting and vice versa.
Okay. Okay. I just feel like Trump really wants to like work closely with Russia, and like that's why it doesn't work. I feel like he wants the US to do business with Russia. He wants, to work on gas projects together and LNG and, make a bunch of money helping Russia trade gas to Europe with Europe. And so, I just think that's why. But
What
that's
do you
maybe
think,
I'm
Holly?
too cynical.
Is am
Well, I think Trump's a Russian asset, so there's that. I've thought that since 2016. So yeah, I'm very I think Trump's completely in the tank with Russia for known and unknown reasons. And so therefore I think I think he's going to screw Ukraine over completely.
right, but how does that work when you've tried to screw Ukraine over and Russia won't let you because they're so unreasonable that like that your lizard brain knows that you cannot accept things on their terms?
I think I think Trump needs Putin more than Putin needs Trump, and Putin knows that. And so Putin is going to humiliate him. And yeah, I think that's the game. Like Trump is Putin's bitch. And yeah, so I don't know. Maybe I'll be surprised. If he actually, I mean, Trump, the US as a country is stronger than Russia as a country, but in terms of personalities and whatever the deal is between the two personalities, I do think Trump is beholden to Putin for whatever.
Here is some prime CIA analysis of personalities. Thank you,
I
Polly.
don't, it's not that, I mean, if Trump wanted to be the actual president of the United States, he could completely, I mean, Biden could have obviously done more as well, as the Ukrainians, I'm sure, will tell you at length. So the US is like, Russia is the US's bitch as countries go, but as personalities go, I think Trump is Putin's bitch. So.
And you think there is no limit to that in terms of domestic humiliation?
I don't think, I mean, what is domestic humiliation anymore?
They
Because
don't believe in anything. I'm sure you know this better than I
there's
do.
no reality. Whatever.
Yes.
Look at this tariff situation. whatever. I mean, literally, JVL on the Triad in the Bulwark yesterday posted a video of, I forget who it was, but one of the Trump officials from involved in the whole tariff thing. And in the middle of his questioning about the tariffs, Trump paused the tariffs, and he had no idea what was
Yeah,
coming.
that was awesome.
And and so he literally he was informed by the Democrat, I believe, Democrat who was questioning him that this had happened. And so he literally had to immediately change course. I mean, all of these people have, including the Trump voters, I believe, they've already humiliated themselves to such an extent that whatever, they will just adapt. I mean, that's what cultists do. That's what minions of authoritarians do, is you turn on a dime, and it's almost like a trickle down of humiliation. You know, Putin humiliates Trump, Trump humiliates all of his supporters and people who work for him, and then I guess they humiliate all of us by having to live here. So
This is actually something I think about a lot, which is probably because I'm young and naive, but like I keep thinking like, okay, I was gonna be unhappy. I keep thinking like all of these Republicans, like they must know exactly what's happening. Like, okay, I'm sorry, Ava is climbing on the table. I'm gonna delay my thoughts because Ava is trying to roll cigarettes and she's too young to do that. Give me a sec.
All right.
Ava's not smoking yet. I thought you know, hardened Ukrainians started
Young?
Start young.
you know, the vodka. She's got vodka in her bottle, and
Not
she's
vodka.
not vodka. Sorry,
You're not allowed to call it vodka.
what is it called? Please teach me the ways. What is vodka? What do y'all drink?
But Samahon is also kind of Russian.
Whatever.
I don't know. I don't know what's our national Ukrainian thing.
Anyway, it was,
what did you think it was? It can be drunken cherry.
I thought it was Horlika.
Oh, horilka. Yeah, the word for vodka is horilka. Yeah. Okay, I think Ava is content with the situation. So my thought was, I keep thinking like all of these people who say this ludicrous shit, like they must know what's happening, or are they so far off that they truly believe in what they're saying? Like I think about this a lot. Like everyone on the inner circle in the White House, like how do they like live with themselves? And I know I'm very naive here. Maybe none of them just don't give a shit. But like,
you're very naive. I think we're all struggling with this every day.
Yeah, like,
you know, with
do they genuinely believe in this?
No, of course not. They know it's bullshit.
They know it's bullshit? Okay.
There's two questions that we're all struggling with every day. The first is there a limit? Which is the question that I was right. Is there something Putin could do, and are we watching it, that forces him back into a more normal posture? And let's, on the one hand, everything you and Holly said is correct. On the other hand, you know, there are constraints for him. Yesterday we saw that with the bond market, right? Or 2 days ago, that, you know, he does this crazy, crazy thing. Nobody can talk him out of it. But then the bond market responds as anybody normal person would have predicted, and he gets spooked by that, right? And so the question, you're always dealing with is there a limit question? That's one big psychological question. And the answer usually turns out to be yes, that there's something that limits him because he is crazy, but he's not unconcerned about consequences to himself, including political consequences. He's unconcerned about consequences to other people, but he's not unaware that, you know, if you bite his ankle, it hurts, and he says, ouch. Right? And he does respond to negative stimulus and so the is there a limit and what is it is a question. And the other question is there all is there anything he can do that pushes other people past their limits? And do they understand that, you know, do they understand that this is all nonsense? It's all bullshit. And the answer for a lot of them is yes, they do. And the evidence for that is that Scott Bessent is, leaking to everybody who will talk to him that what he's advising Trump, right? Like the New York Times, if you listen to the Daily or read, Jonathan
I was
Swan's
listening to it
stories,
just
you know,
2 hours ago.
they'll tell you, oh, well, Scott Bessent was advising Trump that, you got to do this, but it wasn't until he saw it in the bond market that, and, he's not getting that from Trump, right? I was an idiot. And Scott Bessent was telling me, right? He's getting that from Scott Bessent or from somebody, from sources close to Scott Bessent. And so they definitely know this, and they definitely know, um, uh, at but they are terrified of him, and they're terrified of crossing him. And I think these are the two big psychological questions that if you keep them in mind every day, they guide your thinking about the Trump administration. Is there a limit, and what pushes whom over the edge?
Yeah, I would say there's fewer limits all the time on him though, I mean, that personality is, they press the limits, and the more they can get away with, the more they're going to get away with. And so I don't know, like, and I don't, yeah, I don't know, like, it's like you said, it's basically what is his pain? Like, what pain is he, because he doesn't care about anyone else, and he doesn't care about the country. Um, but where Putin is concerned, again, this is why I think that there's some bizarre relationship there, or like it seems that he really has some sort of psychological hold on him, and he seems to be able to humiliate him, and Trump takes it and passes it on. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a limit where Putin is concerned.
So
So
it's a really good question. If there is a limit where Putin is concerned, we have not found it yet.
I mean, I
Um,
don't think so. Is there any example? I mean, he's every now and then he says he's annoyed or whatever, but what does he actually do? I haven't, is there any example that he's actually stuck it to Putin, or
no, but there
he's been
is an
frozen? He looks
example of
frozen.
where he
He does look frozen.
has allowed
Oh,
others
you're
to
back.
stick it to Putin. Um,
You
and
froze there for a sec, but
yeah, but that's okay because
yeah.
it's recording locally and it's going to upload and it's all going to look. The
Oh,
only
okay.
problem in the version that'll end up on the show on YouTube and on Dog Shirt Daily is that you will have said, "Oh, Ben disappeared for a second," and then I will have interrupted
I
my
didn't hear
thought
what you
to
said.
explain it. Now, um, the only example that I can think of is in 2017 when Republican members of Congress were still concerned about election interference. Is that, remember that?
Yeah, those long ago
That was
days.
long ago. Um, Congress passed additional sanctions, and Trump implemented them, and there was this dichotomy between stated policy, which was I can get along with Putin, let's hang out at Helsinki, let's, question the intelligence community, and the policy that the Treasury Department and the State Department was actually carrying out, which was pretty tough, and which actually did involve, giving javelins to the Ukrainians, right? And so there is a sometimes you can achieve in a Trump administration, at least when you have, you know, a sane Secretary of State and a sane Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Treasury, you can achieve a, a, a radical disjuncture between stated policy and actual policy.
But that was a
Um,
feature of the first term that's clearly gone. I mean,
exactly. And the
that was
question,
definitely a feature on multiple fronts. China is another one. There was a dual kind of weird track going on. Honestly, on many, many fronts, U.S. policy was fairly normal, and it was just this every now and then you'd have Trump spout off on something and then you'd have to rush around and like deal with it. But other than that, it was, there was a dual track, but that's clearly gone. So
right. So the question is, should we assume, to some extent, that was um, a creature of the adults in the room approach of Mattis and Tillerson and, you know, um, but the question is there anything Putin could do that would cause it to be revived as a functional matter? And in the spirit of holding out unrealistic silver lining hopes, I want to say this is my version of Trump optimism. And Nastia will tell you when there was a lot of Trump optimism in Ukraine between November and January 20th, I was very consistent. Don't believe a word of it. This is going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
very surprised you're even uttering the words Trump optimism right now.
yeah, so my version of Trump optimism is this. Um, there is a small possibility that Putin's intransigence on the ceasefire is sufficiently disabling from a what Trump wants to do point of view that he's backed into a it'll never be warm, he'll never admit he was wrong, he'll never say let's we need to support Ukraine as long as it takes, or he'll never talk about it, but it'll back him into a quiet posture of doing more rather than less and not, fucking the Ukrainians entirely. That's my version of Trump optimism.
I hope you're right. I can't say that I share it completely. What would Trump do? Let's say Putin just decides to escalate, like invades another country, a NATO country. Like
I
what
love this. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Narva.
let's say Putin goes into what? Lithuania? Which one is he most likely to go
I,
into?
I mean, the which one would you be most likely to go into is a really interesting question, right? So,
The Baltics?
Nastia, give us your sense of if you were Putin, play Putin for us.
Excellent.
Um, what which NATO country would you be most likely to attack, and in what form?
I mean, it's interesting because the first thought that came to my mind is the Baltics, because that's what, like, if you just read the media, that's usually what people are most concerned about, because it's close, they're small countries, they have this history with Russia, there's a bunch of Russians living there, um, and it's a very interesting dynamic. At the same time, though, the Baltics are the countries that are most hyper aware of the Russian threat. And I haven't looked into this deeply, but something tells me that they're not exactly going to roll over if the Russians show up on their border. So I feel like there is this component of a resolve to fight because of historic grievances. So that can be taken into account as well. But I just keep thinking about like NATO and whether NATO is even worth anything anymore. And Ben, I had this obsession with Narva for a little bit, and I like genuinely to this day, like I asked a Norwegian diplomat this like a few weeks ago in DC. We talked about Narva, and I was like, who's gonna go to war over Narva? It's like this little Russian settlement on the border between Estonia and Russia. And so if the Russians decide to do like a little encroachment and just like a little incursion and just take a little bit of land, like 3 villages on the border, like who is gonna go defend that? So and it sounds very apocalyptic to me. So
All
you know,
right.
I agree. I mean, I think they're not gonna. I don't think it's realistic to think they would just roll tanks into Lithuania or whatever. It'll be some small incur, like she said, or they'll continue to escalate
MES scenario.
the
Okay.
naval
Let me
stuff.
show you where it's going to happen.
Okay.
All right.
Ooh,
So
Is
good.
this
first of all,
Kirkenes? Oh no,
what's
that's
that?
Narva.
No, no, no,
Okay,
no. We're
that's
not going
Narva.
to
Okay,
attack Norway. It,
okay.
so for those of you who are watching, here is the town that Nastia was talking about, and this is one of the 5 weirdest towns I've ever been in my life. It is a Russian city. There are basically almost no Estonians living there. They're Russian. A lot of them have refused Estonian citizenship, or are not eligible for it because they refuse to learn to speak Estonian. It is right across the river, a small river from Ivangorod, um, and there are. So it's this little Russian enclave um, in Estonia, and it's, of course, which is part of NATO. And so, you know, Nastia talks about Kirkenes as Spy Town. This is kind of like,
I'm
uh,
sure it's also a spy town.
it's also Spy Town. And I went there because I was planning to project. See, if you look at this, you can see the Ivangorod Fortress, which was built, I'm not making this up, by Ivan the Terrible. And I was going to project across the river, put a big Ukrainian flag on Ivangorod Fortress. And the Estonian police asked me not to do it. Interestingly, not because they thought it was going to provoke an international incident, but because they thought it was going to provoke a domestic riot in Narva among the Russians who live there. So this is a plausible location. Also, I believe, I'm not sure, we'd have to ask him about this, but I believe it was on the bridge between Narva and Ivangorod that the Russians kidnapped President Ilvis's bodyguard. We'd have to ask him about that. So that's a possibility there. But here is where I really think it's going to happen. If we're going to have a test of NATO. Let's zoom out for a second and go a little bit south here to Lithuania. And okay, so what you're going to see here is you got the sovereign country of Lithuania here. Latvia's north, Estonia's north of that. We've got Vilnius, capital of Lithuania, Kaunas, right? By the way, Lithuanians, the last people in Europe to be converted to Christianity, they were pagans, and there was actually a crusade to convert them back in the day. This thing here, Kaliningrad, notice it is completely surrounded by
Oh,
Poland
I'm
on the
right there.
south.
I'm very close to
Lithuania,
Kaliningrad.
yeah, you're right near there. You see, Nastia is here in Gdansk, but if she walked, like 20 miles,
I considered it
she would
driving up to
be
the border.
in Kaliningrad, which, used to be called Königsberg, was called East Prussia, and is now part of Russia. It is an entirely isolated oblast that is separated from Russia by both Belarus and Lithuania. And so I think there's a treaty that requires the Lithuanians to let trains through. But I think if I were Vladimir Putin, the fact that Kaliningrad is isolated from Russia would bother me a lot. And if I were looking for a way to test the resolve of NATO, I would be thinking about, look at this little space. Remember that Belarus is not a real country. It's actually
Right.
just really
It's just
part of,
Russia.
it's just Russian dominated. So there's this little window, corridor between Belarus and and the Kaliningrad pocket. And I would be super interested in testing whether whether NATO is actually willing to go to war for Lithuania to defend that little strip of land. And we know that the Russians love to open up strips of land to Russian populations or Russian
They did it
speaking
in Ukraine.
populations. This is, of course, what that southern corridor is in Ukraine, along the Black Sea. And we, wiped out huge numbers of people in Mariupol in order to do that. And so this little strip between, it strikes me as those two spots, Narva, where you have an actually relatively restive Russian-speaking population that identifies with Russia, right across the river from Novgorod, from Ivangorod, and then the Kaliningrad, which, by the way, was German-speaking until World War II, and there, it's actually not historically Russia; it's historically Prussian. This is East Prussia, but is really important to Russia because it represents the victory in World War II. And I think those are the two flashpoints. I don't think it's Kirkenes. I really don't think it's Finland, even though Minna has apparently stood us up today. I think Russia is smarter than to want to fight the Finns again.
Yeah.
But testing Trump.
Yeah. So
Testing.
that's the question. What does Trump do? Let's say he goes for one of these. Then what does Trump do?
Oh, I think we really don't know. And I think I would not bet. This is
I don't think he
why
wouldn't do anything.
Nastia's point that NATO may already be dead, the fact that we're
Somebody
having
told
this
me this a while ago. Yeah.
Somebody told you what?
I wish I remembered who this person was, but it was somebody smart. I was having this conversation, but it could have been Ben.
The mere fact that we're having this conversation is a reflection of the fact that NATO is not what it was 3 months ago.
Exactly.
And-
Because I was talking about security guarantees for Ukraine and how Ukrainians still think that NATO is the only security guarantee that can work. And the person that I was talking to, whose name I'm forgetting, was like, but what's NATO anymore? Like, NATO used to be the American deterrent. Like, that's poof, gone,
Well, it's still Europe and Canada. I mean, the Europeans, I don't know, would they respond? Obviously, it's not the same without us.
I think the Finns and the Norwegians would respond.
They would. Yeah, they would definitely respond. And I don't think it is obvious that Russia... Look, the Estonians themselves are an extremely capable fighting force. I don't know that I have much of a sense of the Lithuanians, but as a general matter, the Baltic countries have been thinking about this problem since 1990, and it's not...
They're little mini Ukraines, except in the EU.
Well, and with a longer period of substantial rearmament, and full NATO interoperability. So there's the Finns could come and the Swedes could come to Estonia or Lithuania's aid rather quickly, and in fashions that would be, and we should talk to Minna about this, so there's a third scenario that I want to wrap with, and maybe when we shame Minna and she actually comes on, we can talk about these three, which is an attack on Poland. And so the advantage to this from the Russian point, the disadvantage is that Poland is a big country with a big military, and it's very capable. It also doesn't have a Kaliningrad, except of course Kaliningrad, which is to its north, which is to say right next door to where Nastia is joining us from. But there's no corridor through Poland. But what Poland does have is, you could hit it by accident, right? And so there were bombs that fell genuinely by accident in Poland earlier in the war, and they raised questions. So what if you really hit something in Poland, but then professed that it was an accident? And
They're
I
not
think
going to do anything. Sorry I interrupted you, because this is sort of what happened before, right? Because it's the intent that matters. As far as I understand it, the whole thing with NATO's Article 5 is it's so sacred that they're gonna dance around the situation in any way they can to delay the invocation of it as soon as humanly possible.
No, that's
So-
right. But the point is
until they see that Russia is actually intending to hit it and start a war, they're not going to do it.
okay, but that's exactly the point, right? So again, you got to think like Putin, right? We know that an accidental bomb dropping in Poland, or maybe it's a bomb that fell, or maybe it's Ukrainian air defense has gone crazy. We don't know, right? So Russia apologizes and says oops, and we accept that. We know that. But what if they apologize, they say oops, and we don't believe them? We actually believe it was intentional. Or what if it's really obviously intentional and kills Polish troops or civilians, and we don't believe them, but they profess it, right? These are gray zone tactics that are very exploitable. And when you use them, you can push and push and push the line. And so I think that's the third category of possibility, which is not an assault that tries to take territory, but just, probing the line. It's kind of the way they do in the Balkans, in the Baltics with, naval stuff, right? Cutting cables, right? These sort of gray zone bullshit that we all know is intentional, we all know is them, and yet there's no real retaliation because it's in the Baltic Sea and it's some fishing vehicle, it's not boat, it's not really a Russian Navy ship, right? And so, that's the other thing to look for is just, stuff that pushes the line. All right, we are going to wrap up. Minna Olander, you are in the doghouse.
She forgot because she went for a run and didn't write down in her calendar that she was supposed to do this
This is
today.
the kind of excuses we expect from Europeans who don't spend enough on GDP and
I
don't
couldn't agree more, to be honest.
carry their weight in the defense arrangement. You guys just freeload off of the American security umbrella and go for a run while we're carrying the water for you.
How is NATO going to survive in these conditions?
How is NATO going to survive? We gotta take out the Houthis, but we gotta do it. We'll send you the bill later. Minna will join us sometime next week to discuss all of these possible scenarios and maybe to discuss the Finnish scenario as well as other Russian NATO attacks that I haven't thought of. But we will pick this conversation up maybe Monday or whenever Minna can do and not forget. Folks, we will see you then. Oh, and join us this afternoon at 4 for Lawfare Live, we are going to be doing our weekly roundup of all the litigation news. It has been wild and woolly and ended last night with a pretty damn good Supreme Court decision in one of the cases that we really needed some good news from. So, smiles, dog shirts, cactuses, and we'll see.
Babies.
Well, I don't see a baby.
She ran
And
away.
we'll see you on Monday.